Lucy Rodriguez was 30 years old and had a serenity that no one ever mistook for weakness. She lived with her sick mother in a cramped brick room with a tar paper roof in Hope Village, a low-income neighborhood on the outskirts of the Bronx. Every morning before dawn, she would clutch her small wooden rosary, slip a blue-covered notebook into her backpack, and board 2 packed buses to reach the gated community of Emerald Gardens, where high walls and security cameras separated the noise of the projects from the silence of money. That was where her new job was, caring for Mr. Roger Alvarez, 79, the father of the millionaire businessman Alexander Alvarez. They said a stroke had left him permanently in a wheelchair. The community's gate guard had whispered, without making eye contact, that 29 caregivers had come and gone in the 3 weeks before her, all fired without explanation. Lucy felt that old knot in her stomach. In a public hospital years ago, she had tried to warn them about an elderly patient being given the wrong medication. No one listened and he died. Since then, the fear of not being heard followed her like a shadow. Her bond with Roger formed in minutes. At their first meeting, he looked at her with tired but lucid eyes and murmured that her hand was just like my late wife's when she'd fix my tie. Lucy saw in him the figure of a father she never had, and in the quiet room, she sensed something more than just illness, a kind of quiet injustice. She had 2 immediate goals: keep the job to pay for her studies and her mother's medicine, and protect the dignity of Mr. Roger, who seemed more sedated than his condition warranted. The practical obstacle appeared. Quickly, Clara, the house manager, forbade her from reviewing prescriptions, camera footage, and paperwork, reminding her that medical decisions are to be respected, not questioned. The emotional obstacle cut deeper. Every time she thought of asking something, the memory of the elderly man in the hospital and the shame of being ignored returned. Without a word, Lucy began to observe. She noticed the cracked screen phone he always carried in his pocket, the closed piano in the living room where Roger had once played old jazz standards, the habit of Valerie, Alexander's elegant wife, of going upstairs alone every night to say good night to her father-in-law. In the blue notebook, she jotted down routines, times, and small details without explaining their future use. She left her shift with a silent urgency in her chest and a short phrase: "Lord, if no one else will listen to him, let me listen." The house was enormous, but Lucy soon learned to move through its shadows, the smell of wax on the marble floor of the entryway, the muffled sound of shoes on the Persian rugs. The light filtered through thick curtains that never let the sun fully in. Everything there seemed designed to impress, not to shelter. The walls boasted large paintings in gilded frames, photographs of Alexander shaking hands with politicians and businessmen, golf trophies on glass shelves. But in Roger's room upstairs, the world was different, small, bare, almost clinical. The bed was too narrow for a man who had built so much. The wheelchair was always in the same corner, next to a window that no one ever opened. There was a nightstand with a glass of water, a remote control that didn't work, and a black-covered Bible with yellowed paper bookmarks. On the wall, a single photo, a young Roger, in a light-colored suit, next to a woman with a wide smile and kind eyes. His late wife, Lucy imagined, the same one he said had hands like hers. In the first few days, Roger barely spoke. He stared at the ceiling, breathed slowly, moved his fingers on the blanket as if playing invisible keys. Sometimes, when Lucy changed the sheets or adjusted his pillow, he would fix his eyes on her with a startling intensity. It wasn't anger. It was a plea, as if he were asking her to see something that everyone else pretended not to. Clara appeared 3 times a day, in the morning to check if Lucy had arrived on time, at lunchtime to bring Roger's food tray, and in the late afternoon to review the chart of his vital signs. She was a woman in her 50s, thin, always in high heels with thin-rimmed glasses hanging from a gold chain. She spoke little, but every word was loaded with authority. Lucy had learned as a child to recognize the tone of someone who commands without shouting. It's the tone of someone who knows they don't have to prove anything. "Here, we follow what Dr. Salinas orders," Clara said on the second day, when Lucy asked why the evening medication made Roger so limp. "You take care of his body, not his mind. Got it?" Lucy lowered her eyes and said yes, but inside Something stirred. She had seen that kind of harshness before, at the hospital, when older nurses cut off questions from new aides. She had tasted that bitter feeling of being right and not being able to speak. She had carried the weight of a silence that kills. At night, on the crowded bus ride home, Lucy would open the blue notebook and reread. Her notes. Nightly med, 10 p.m., eyes glaze over, muscles lock up. Valerie goes up beforehand, sweet smell in the glass. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew it meant something. And she also knew that if she stayed silent again, she wouldn't be able to look at her own face in the mirror. The neighborhood where she lived was as different from Emerald Gardens as day is from night. Dirt-packed streets, dim streetlights, kids running barefoot even after 10. Her home was a small add-on room in the back of her close friend Brenda's house. 2 tiny rooms separated by a plastic curtain. Her mother slept in the bed, Lucy on a mattress on the floor. There was no closet. Their clothes hung on nails in the wall. The refrigerator was old, noisy, and only stayed cold if no one opened the door too often. But there in that cramped space was something the Alvarez mansion lacked: human warmth. Her mother, even sick, would smile when Lucy arrived. She would hold her daughter's hand, ask about her day, and pray with her before they slept. "God gave you a good heart, my child," she always said. "Don't let the world harden it." Lucy saved those words like someone saving coins in a piggy bank. She knew she would need them, because something inside her, stubborn and old, had already decided she wasn't going to pretend not to see. Not this time. On Wednesday, as she was helping Roger with his breakfast oatmeal, he suddenly squeezed her wrist. The grip was weak, but the intention was clear. Lucy stopped, put the spoon back in the bowl, and looked into his eyes. "Do you want to tell me something, sir?" Roger moved his lips, but no sound came. "Out!" His eyes, however, were screaming. Lucy felt a chill run up her spine. She glanced at the closed bedroom door, then back at him. "I'm going to pay attention," she whispered. "I promise." And that's what she did. She started observing everything, the way Valerie entered the room, always with a polite smile and a glass in her hand. The way Clara averted her gaze when Lucy asked about old prescriptions. The way the doctor, Dr. Salinas, visited Roger in a hurry, barely looking at the patient, signing papers without really reading them. Lucy also began to notice what the other staff members knew but didn't say. Martha, the cook, a black woman with graying hair and calloused hands, had worked there for 15 years. One day, while chopping onions in the kitchen, she murmured softly, "That man isn't being cared for right, but nobody wants to hear what I think." Julio, the 63-year-old security guard who sat in the gatehouse, also made a strange comment. "Ever since the young lady married Mr. Alexander, things have changed around here. Cameras turn off by themselves, medicine comes in through the back, but I'm just a guard, you know. Who am I to say anything?" Lucy listened to it all, wrote it all down, pieced it together, and at night before sleeping she prayed the rosary with her mother, asking for courage, because she already knew where this was headed. She already knew that soon she would have to choose between fear and the truth, and this time, with God's help, she was going to choose differently. The following days turned Lucy into a piece of the furniture, discreet, silent, always observant. While downstairs there were laughs from business deals and the clinking of glasses, on the upper floor all you could hear was the whisper of the oxygen machine and the scrape of wheels on marble. Every morning she carefully checked Mr. Rogers' posture, the temperature of his hands, the way his eyes would suddenly dim after certain visits. She began to notice sensory patterns. There was a particular sweetish smell that lingered in the air after Valerie left the room, always carrying a crystal glass with vitamins for her father-in-law. Roger's muscles would stiffen shortly after, and his head would loll to the side as if someone had flipped a switch. Sometimes, in brief moments of lucidity, he would move his fingers on the armrest of his chair in a nervous rhythm, as if trying to write something in the air. Lucy started cataloguing these moments in the blue notebook. Monday, 10:15 p.m. Valerie came up with glass. Sweet smell. Roger went limp in 10 minutes. Tuesday, 9:50 p.m. Valerie arrived earlier. Roger tried to speak. She said it was better for him to rest. Gave him the glass. He fell asleep too quickly. The notes grew, page after page, each one a small brick in the construction of something larger that Lucy couldn't yet name. In the kitchen, her bond with Martha deepened. The cook had an unemployed son who lived in the same neighborhood as Lucy, and the two began to talk during their breaks when Clara wasn't around. It was during one of these conversations, as they washed dishes side by side, that Martha told her about the video. "I've got it saved on my phone," she whispered, glancing at the door. "I filmed it secretly a few months ago. Mr. Roger was walking with a cane in the garden. He wasn't perfect, limped a lot, but he was walking. Now look at him. He can't. Ivan, stand up." Lucy's heart raced. "Can you show me?" Martha hesitated, bit her lip, but then pulled her phone from her apron pocket and showed her. In the blurry, shaky video, you could see Roger walking slowly across the lawn, leaning on a cane, a nurse beside him. He stopped every few steps, took a deep breath, but kept going. His eyes, even on the small screen, seemed more alive, more present. "Was this before Mrs. Valerie started taking care of him?" Lucy asked. It was. Right after she took over, they brought in Dr. Salinas, changed all his medications, and Mr. Roger started getting worse. In a matter of weeks, he wasn't getting up anymore. They said it was the stroke progressing. But I always thought it was strange. Lucy handed the phone back, but the image was seared into her mind. The man in the video and the motionless man in the wheelchair seemed like different people, and the more she thought about it, the more the pieces fit together. In the garden, during her afternoon break, Lucy talked to Julio. The guard was a quiet man of few words who spent his days in the gatehouse, reading the newspaper and drinking reheated coffee. But when the topic was the Alvarez house, he had a lot to say. "You know what I find strange?" he commented, lighting a cigarette. "The cameras. There are cameras everywhere here, but there are times when they turn off. Always right when Mrs. Valerie goes up to her father-in-law's room. Clara says it's scheduled maintenance, but maintenance every day at the same time. It doesn't make sense. And you never said anything?" Julio took a long drag, exhaling the smoke slowly. "I did, once, to Mr. Alexander. He said I was seeing things, that his wife was a saint for taking care of his sick father. After that, I kept my mouth shut. I don't want to lose my job. I've got grandkids to support." Lucy understood. She knew that fear well, that need to stay silent to survive. But she also knew that silence had a price, and that someone at some point would have to pay the bill. In the following weeks, Lucy set two concrete goals: get Roger to eat without vomiting, and understand why his moments of lucidity always coincided with Valerie's absences. The first goal was practical, almost medical. The second was dangerous, bordering on an accusation. She achieved a small victory with his food. She discovered that if she sang softly while offering him the food, Roger would relax and accept the spoonfuls more easily. They were old hymns her mother had taught her, church songs with simple melodies and words of faith. Jesus, meek and humble of heart. And slowly, the soup went down, the oatmeal was eaten, the weak body received some nourishment. But this victory came at a cost. Clara complained that Lucy was getting too attached to the patient. Valerie insinuated with a cold smile that a caregiver who sings must have too much free time, maybe she needs more tasks. And the tasks came: cleaning the already clean bathroom, reorganizing the already organized closet, washing laundry that could wait. Anything to keep her away from Roger, to break the bond that was forming. Still, Lucy persisted. And on a Thursday afternoon, when Valerie left early for a social event, something extraordinary happened. Roger, alone with Lucy, was more alert than she had ever seen him. He turned his head, followed her movements around the room, and when she came closer to adjust his blanket, he held her hand with more strength. "Help me," he managed to say, his voice hoarse, almost inaudible. Lucy knelt beside the chair. "I'm trying, Mr. Roger, but you need to tell me what's happening." He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. The words came slowly, pulled from a deep place. "She gives me something in the glass. Makes me weak." Lucy's heart pounded. "Mrs. Valerie?" He closed his eyes, nodded slightly. When he opened them again, there were tears. "Don't want to die like this." Lucy squeezed his hand, felt the fragility of the bones under the thin skin. "You won't, I promise." But making promises was easy. Keeping them was another story. Because that very night, when she confronted Clara about the possibility of reviewing Roger's old prescriptions, the reaction was immediate and harsh. "Are you trying to tell me that the lady of the house is poisoning her father-in-law?" Clara said, her eyes narrow behind her glasses. "Do you know what happens to people who spread lies like that? Lawsuits, my dear. Lawsuits and jail time. I'm not spreading lies, I just want to compare the old prescriptions with the new ones. If everything's fine, there's no problem, right? The prescriptions are locked away and that's final. You don't have the training to understand these things. Your job is to give baths, change diapers, and keep quiet. Understood?" Lucy understood. She understood that she was alone. She understood that she would need more than words to prove what she felt in her gut. She understood that every step forward would be a war. That night, she missed the last bus. She had to wait almost an hour at the bus terminal, sitting on a hard bench surrounded by tired people heading home. When she finally got to Hope Village, it was past midnight. Her mother was awake, praying the rosary, worried. "You're late, honey." "I lost track of time, Mom. I'm sorry." Her mother looked at her in that way only mothers can, seeing beyond the words. "You're getting into trouble at that house, aren't you?" Lucy took off her shoes, massaged her aching feet. "It's not trouble. It's what's right." "What's right can hurt sometimes, Lucy." "I know, but staying silent hurts more." And that's what made her go back day after day, even with Clara watching her every move, even with Valerie giving her icy glares, even with Dr. Salinas showing up unannounced to make sure the caregiver was following protocol. Lucy began to watch Valerie more closely. The woman was 38, always impeccably dressed, with sleek, shiny hair, manicured nails, and perfect makeup. She spoke in a soft voice, smiled at guests, and posted photos on social media showing her dedication to her dear father-in-law. But when she was alone with Roger, when she thought no one was watching, the smile vanished. Her eyes turned cold, her voice impatient. Once, from the hallway, Lucy heard Valerie speaking to her father-in-law. "Stop staring at me like that, you stubborn old man. You should be grateful I still waste my time coming up here. If it were up to me, you'd already be in some nursing home, far away from everything." Roger didn't answer. He couldn't. But Lucy, hidden behind the slightly ajar door, heard, and she wrote it down. Date, time, exact words. The blue notebook was getting full, each page a small piece of evidence, each note a fragment of truth that proved nothing on its own, but together with the others began to form a clear and terrible picture. In the kitchen, Martha confided more details. "I've seen boxes of medicine come in through the back door. No invoice, no prescription. Clara's the one who receives them, and always after those deliveries, Mr. Roger gets worse." In the garden, Julio showed Lucy the camera logs. "Look here. Every day between 9:30 and 10 at night the system goes down. It only comes back on after 11, right around the time Mrs. Valerie goes upstairs." Lucy was connecting the dots, but she knew she didn't have enough yet. She needed something concrete, the vial, a recording, undeniable proof. And, to get it, she would have to risk everything. Her job, her safety, maybe even her life. On a cold July night, returning home on the packed bus, Lucy opened the notebook and reread everything. The notes, the times, the smells, the words. And at the bottom of the last page she wrote a short prayer. "Lord, give me the courage to do what must be done, and if I fall, let me at least fall on my feet." She closed the notebook, rested her head against the cold glass of the window, and let the city lights blur past, her tired eyes. She knew the storm was coming. She knew she would soon have to choose between safe silence and the dangerous truth, and she already knew, deep in her heart, which choice she was going to make. Over time, the image of Valerie became clearer in Lucy's eyes. She wasn't an inherently evil woman, but someone shaped by the fear of losing what she had gained. She came from an upper-middle-class family in New York, had a degree in marketing, and had left her job at an event planning agency when she married Alexander. She had taken on With calculated dedication, the mission of humanizing her husband's corporate image, she attended charity events, posted smiling photos with underprivileged children, and gave interviews about social responsibility. But behind the polished facade was a gnawing fear. The fear that Roger, if he regained his strength and voice, might change the old will she suspected left her in a secondary position. Alexander was an only child, but his father had always been independent, stubborn, and resistant to manipulation. Valerie knew that as long as her father-in-law was lucid, she would never have total control over the family fortune. Dr. Salinas, a renowned neurologist, was her functional accomplice. He wasn't a monster but a tired man, convinced that an agitated patient suffers more than a well-sedated one. He agreed to adjust dosages at Valerie's request, who justified each increase with exaggerated episodes of agitation. His moral line was drawn at not doing anything that openly broke the law. He preferred to operate in grey areas, protected by signing prescriptions that seemed reasonable at first glance. The first major breakthrough came as a direct result of Lucy's small observations. On a Saturday afternoon, while helping Martha organize a pantry drawer, she found an old folder with copies of previous medical exams. Alexander had tossed some old documents in there that Clara hadn't yet discarded. Lucy, her heart pounding, leafed through the papers. A medical report from 8 months ago offered a different diagnosis: partial gait limitation due to stroke sequelae, intensive physical therapy and mobility stimulation recommended, favorable prognosis for partial recovery with proper follow-up. Lucy read it again and again. Nothing in it mentioned permanent immobility. Nothing justified the wheelchair for life. She discreetly showed it to Martha, who confirmed, "I told you, he used to walk, and now look." That same night, Lucy stayed late, pretending to tidy up Roger's room after her shift. Valerie came up, as always, with the crystal glass in her hand. Lucy excused herself to the adjoining bathroom, left the door slightly ajar, and watched through the mirror's reflection. She saw Valerie take a small vial from her purse, drip a clear liquid into the glass of water, and stir it with a small silver spoon. The sweetish smell filled the air. Valerie approached Roger, speaking softly, almost affectionately. "Here you go, Dad. This will do you good. It will calm you down." Roger turned his face away, but she insisted, placing the straw between his lips. He drank. He had no choice. Minutes later, his entire body went limp, his head lolled, and his eyes closed. Lucy waited for Valerie to leave, then entered the room. She looked for the vial. It wasn't in sight, but in the guest bathroom, inside a forgotten toiletry bag on the sink, she found it. A small bottle, discreet label, clonazepam drops. Lucy took a picture with her phone, noted the name. Later, at home, she looked it up online. A powerful anti-anxiety drug. In high doses and with continuous use. Extreme muscle weakness, drowsiness, loss of motor coordination. Exactly Roger's symptoms. A chill ran down her spine. It wasn't poison in the classic sense. It was worse. It was a legitimate medication, used incorrectly, turned into a tool of imprisonment. And Dr. Salinas signed the prescriptions, making it all legal, documented, and impossible to challenge without concrete proof. The past came back like a punch to the gut. The elderly man at the hospital, the nurse who ignored her warning, the preventable death, the guilt that never left. Lucy closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prayed. Not again. Not this time. In the following days, the subplots intertwined painfully. Lucy's mother received a letter from the hospital postponing her surgery because they were short on funds for the deposit. Lucy cried in the Alvarez's bathroom, biting her hand to keep from making a sound. Martha told her that her son was considering taking a suspicious job, transporting packages without knowing what was inside because he needed to pay off debts. Julio confided that his granddaughter had dropped out of school to work at a diner, and he couldn't convince her to go back. They were all caught in the same webs: money, fear, silence. And then came Father Stephen. He was the priest of the church in Hope Village, a man in his 60s with white hair, large hands, and a calm voice. He had known Lucy since she was a child, had baptized her, and had supported her mother through her illness. One Sunday after Mass, Lucy approached him and asked to talk. They sat on a wooden bench next to the sacristy. Lucy told him everything: the notebook, the notes, Martha's video, the vial, her suspicions. The priest listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was silent for a long minute. "Are you afraid?" he finally asked. "Yes? And you still want to go on?" "I have to." Father Stephen nodded. "Then you're going to need help. I know a lawyer who works with the parish on cases of elder abuse. I'll talk to him." "Father, I don't have money for a lawyer. He doesn't charge those who can't pay. Trust me." Lucy trusted him because she had no other choice, because she was too alone to give up and too accompanied to pretend she didn't see. But the resistance grew. Valerie started changing. Lucy's shifts, keeping her away from the night hours. Clara began searching her backpack on her way out, looking for household items that might have been taken by mistake. Dr. Salinas showed up unannounced, examined Roger briefly, and then pulled Lucy into the hallway. "I've received complaints that you're questioning my work," he said, his tone pleasant but firm. "I understand you care about the patient. It's admirable. But be careful with baseless accusations. Slander is a crime. And I have all the signed documents, all the prescriptions are within the law. You have nothing but personal impressions. Think carefully before you do something that could harm you." Lucy lowered her head and murmured that she understood, but inside her decision was made. She wasn't backing down, because she had seen Roger try to lift a finger, as if asking for help, because she had heard his trembling voice say, "Help me," because she knew that silence also had a price, and this time she wasn't willing to pay it. On a Friday night, heading home, Lucy opened the blue notebook to the last written page and added a new line. "Monday, take action." She didn't know exactly how yet, but she knew time was running out, that Roger was being slowly erased, that if she waited any longer it might be too late. At home, her mother sensed the tension. "You're going to do what you decided, aren't you?" "I am." "And what if it goes wrong?" Lucy put the notebook in a drawer, picked up her rosary, and squeezed the wooden beads between her fingers. "If it goes wrong, at least I'll sleep peacefully knowing I tried." Her mother held her hand and prayed softly. "May God protect you, child, and may the truth come out, whatever the cost." That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the street, a dog barking, a motorcycle passing, loud music from a distant party. She thought of Roger, alone in that huge house, trapped in a chair he might not even need to be in. She thought of the hospital, of the old man who died, of the weight she had carried ever since. And she thought of the choice she was about to make, between the safety of silence and the danger of truth, between keeping her job and keeping a clear conscience, between surviving quietly or living on her feet. When the sun rose, Lucy got up, showered, put on her uniform, and packed the blue notebook in her backpack. She looked at her mother, still sleeping, covered up to her neck, breathing slowly. She kissed her forehead, whispered a prayer, and left. On the packed bus, standing, holding on to the metal strap, Lucy closed her eyes and prayed for strength, because she knew the next few days would be the hardest of her life. But she also knew, with that quiet certainty that comes from within, that she was doing the right thing, and that God, who never abandons those who fight for justice, would be there, not to stop the shadows, but to give light to those who dare to open the window. The opportunity presented itself as an absence. Alexander had to travel to New York City for a business meeting that would last 3 days, leaving Valerie alone in the mansion with Roger and a minimal staff. Lucy asked to switch her shift, claiming she needed to take her mother to a doctor's appointment the next morning. In reality, she wanted to be there at night when the masks came off. Clara, thinking she was being clever, agreed to the switch, assuming it would leave the caregiver more tired and controllable. Lucy prepared with what she already knew. She reviewed the location of the hallway cameras in her notebook. She knew one had an angle that partially captured the door to Roger's room and the small table where Valerie prepared the vitamins. She set the voice recorder on her cracked screen phone, ready to go, hidden in her uniform pocket. She spoke with Julio at the gatehouse, asking him to come up if he heard any strange noises in the middle of the night. She reminded him of his own words. One day something serious is going to happen and no one will see it. Julio hesitated, scratching his graying beard. What if I lose my job over this? What if we lose our souls by staying quiet? Lucy countered. The guard didn't answer, but he nodded. It was enough. The house grew quiet as the porch lights went out one by one. Martha left at 8 after preparing dinner. Clara left at 9, reminding Lucy that any emergency should be reported immediately by phone. Valerie ate alone in the dining room, drinking white wine, scrolling through her phone. At 10:30 she went upstairs. Lucy was in Roger's room adjusting his pillows. The old man looked at her with those tired eyes that said so much. She held his hand, squeezed it gently. "Tonight will be different," she whispered. "Trust me." Roger blinked slowly, and Lucy was sure he understood. Valerie entered the room at 11 o'clock sharp, as always, carrying the crystal glass. She smiled at Lucy, that polite, empty smile. "You can go take a break. I'll stay with him. I'm just going to heat up a compress for his neck. He's been complaining of pain," Lucy lied. "No need. He'll be asleep in a minute." But Lucy had already left, taking her phone and leaving it on, hidden behind a picture frame on the bookshelf, its camera discreetly pointed toward the room. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. She could hear Valerie's voice inside, low, almost sweet. "Come on, Dad. Take your vitamins. It'll do you good." Through the reflection in the hallway window, Lucy could see part of the room. She saw Valerie take the small vial from her purse, drip it into the glass and stir it with the little spoon. The sweetish smell reached her. She saw the woman approach Roger, place the straw between his lips. But this time, Roger turned his head. He refused. "Don't be stubborn," Valerie said, her voice losing its sweetness. "You need to rest." Roger clamped his mouth shut. Valerie insisted, holding his chin. "Just drink it. Or do you want me to call Salinas and ask him to up the dose? You want to end up in some nursing home, you annoying old man?" That's when Lucy saw it. Valerie forced Roger's mouth open, poured the liquid in and covered his nose to make him swallow. The old man's body struggled weakly, but he had no strength. He swallowed, coughed. His head fell to the side. And then, suddenly, Roger's breathing changed. Short, rapid, gasping. His fingers clenched. His face turned pale. Lucy burst through the door. "What did you do?" Valerie spun around, surprised, furious. "You shouldn't be in here." "He can't breathe." Lucy ran to the chair, snatching the glass from Valerie's hand. In the process, she slammed her shoulder hard against the corner of the dresser. The pain was sharp, radiating down her entire arm, but she didn't let go of the glass. "Are you crazy? Give me that." Valerie tried to grab it back, but Lucy moved away, shouting, "Julio! Julio, get up here!" Valerie changed tactics. Her voice became loud, hysterical, theatrical. "Help! This woman is attacking my father-in-law. Somebody help me!" Julio ran up the stairs, out of breath. He stopped at the door, taking in the scene. Lucy holding the glass, her shoulder visibly injured. Roger nearly unconscious in the chair. Valerie with tears of rage in her eyes. "Julio, restrain this crazy woman. She brought in outside medicine. She's trying to kill my father-in-law." The guard hesitated. He looked at Lucy. "That's not true," Lucy said, her voice trembling but firm. "The medicine is hers. It's right here in her purse. I saw her put it in the glass. And there's a camera in the hallway that filmed everything. Liar, I'll sue you, I'll ruin you." Julio glanced at the hallway camera, thought fast. "I'm going to save the recording now, before someone deletes it." "You're not authorized to touch the cameras," Valerie screamed. But Julio was already heading downstairs. And Lucy, despite the pain in her shoulder, didn't drop the glass. She held on tight, even when Valerie threatened to call the police, even when she promised Lucy would never work in a private home again, even when she said she'd claim the caregiver had stolen jewelry. "Make up whatever you want," Lucy said, "but Mr. Roger isn't taking anything else you give him." Valerie realized she was losing control. She grabbed her phone, called Alexander. She spoke through sobs, saying the caregiver had snapped, was accusing her of absurd things, that he needed to come back immediately. Lucy used the distraction, ran to the bathroom, poured the liquid from the glass down the sink, washed it thoroughly and put the empty glass away. Then she retrieved her phone from behind the picture frame. The recording was there. Valerie's voice, the threats, the whole scene. When she returned to the room, Roger was breathing better. Lucy knelt beside him, held his trembling hand. "Hang in there. It's going to be okay." The old man looked at her with gratitude. He couldn't speak, but his eyes said everything. Julio returned with a flash drive in his hand. I copied it. The recording shows her entering with the purse, closing the door, and then you screaming and me coming up. It's all here. Valerie turned pale. "You're all going to regret this." But her voice no longer had the same firmness, because she knew the evidence was mounting against her, and that this time silence wasn't going to protect her. Lucy spent the night in the room, watching over Roger. Her shoulder ached, throbbed, but she didn't complain. At 3 in the morning, Martha arrived, called by Julio. She brought ice for Lucy's shoulder and chamomile tea for Roger. The three of them stayed there in silence, waiting for dawn. Valerie locked herself in her room, calling lawyers, friends, anyone who could help build a defense. But with each call, her voice grew more desperate. When the sun rose, Lucy was exhausted, in pain, but whole. She had the glass, the recording from her phone, Julio's flash drive, and the vial that Martha had hidden in the kitchen, wrapped in a cloth with the date written on it. And she had something more, the certainty that, this time, her voice would be heard. At 7 in the morning, Alexander arrived from the city, driving like a madman. He stormed into the house, went straight up to his father's room. He found Lucy sitting beside the chair, her arm in a makeshift sling, her eyes red with exhaustion. "What happened here?" Lucy stood up slowly. She looked him in the eye. "It's time for you to hear the truth." And she began to tell him every detail, every note, every piece of proof. Alexander listened, his face growing tighter, his hands clenching into fists. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he looked at his father. Roger, more awake than he had been in months, nodded slightly. "Valerie!" Alexander shouted, his voice echoing through the entire house. "Get down here, now!" And Lucy knew the war had begun, but that, for the first time, she wasn't fighting it alone. The next day, Emerald Gardens was no longer just a haven of elegant secrets. Father Stephen arrived with Mr. Bernardes, a lawyer who worked with the parish on elder rights violation cases. Alexander received them in the living room, his face grim, like a man more accustomed to signing contracts than hearing uncomfortable truths. Lucy was there, sitting in a hard chair, her arm bandaged, Julio beside her. Martha waited nervously in the kitchen. Valerie came down last, impeccably dressed, perfect makeup, as if she were heading to a society luncheon. The proof of the facts didn't rely on elaborate speeches, but on what already existed. Julio, with trembling hands, connected the flash drive to the large television in the living room. The image appeared. Valerie entering Roger's room with her purse, the door closing. Minutes later, the audio captured her voice, clear. "Come on, Dad, take your vitamins." And then, lower, harsher. "Or do you want me to ask Salinas to up the dose? You want to end up in some nursing home?" The silence in the room was thick. Alexander looked from the screen to his wife, then back to the screen. "That was taken out of context," Valerie began, her voice controlled. "I was just trying to get him to take his prescribed medication. He's stubborn, you know that." Mr. Bernardes cleared his throat. "May I play another audio file?" Alexander agreed. The recording Lucy had made on her phone, hidden behind the picture frame, began to play. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was audible. Valerie: "Don't be stubborn, you need to rest. And then, more clearly, just drink it. Or do you want me to call Salinas and ask him to up the dose? You want to end up in some nursing home, you annoying old man?" Valerie went pale. I was stressed. He provokes me. He does it on purpose to annoy me." "And this?" Lucy asked, standing up slowly. She motioned to Martha, who came in carrying a small plastic bag. Inside was a small vial wrapped in a cloth with a handwritten label. Date, July 15th, found in Valerie Alvarez's purse. Martha placed the bag on the coffee table. I kept it like Lucy asked, with the date, time, and my signature as a witness. Mr. Bernardes picked up the bag, examining the vial through the plastic. Clonazepam, a controlled substance, and according to Mr. Roger Alvarez's official prescriptions, he opened a folder, pulled out copies. The prescribed dose was 5 drops per day. This vial shows a much higher usage, and there is no recent prescription to justify this amount. I was just following Dr. Salinas' orders, Valerie protested, her voice rising. Then let's call Dr. Salinas, Alexander said, his voice icy. He picked up his phone and dialed. He put it on speaker. Salinas answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy as if he'd just woken up. Hello? Doctor, this is Alexander Alvarez. I need to confirm something. How many drops of clonazepam did you prescribe per day for my father? There was a pause. 5 drops at night to help with sleep. And did you increase that dose recently? No. Why? Is there a problem? Alexander looked at Valerie. No problem, doctor. Thank you. He hung up. The silence returned, heavier than before. Valerie tried another tactic. Tears began to stream down her face. Alexander, you know how much I've dedicated myself to your father. I gave up my career, my life to take care of him, and now this maid comes in with these absurd accusations, and you believe her? This isn't about believing her or you, Alexander said, his voice tired. It's about what the evidence shows. Mr. Bernardes pulled more papers from his folder. Here are Mr. Rogers' old medical reports from 8 months ago. The diagnosis was partial gait limitation. They recommended physical therapy, not immobilization. He had a favorable prognosis. Things got worse, Valerie said, wiping her tears. The stroke progressed. Then why is there no record of that in his exams? The lawyer asked. And why, according to witnesses, was Mr. Roger walking with a cane months ago and then suddenly became completely dependent on a wheelchair? Martha, from the kitchen doorway, spoke softly. I have a video. All heads turned. Alexander motioned for her to come closer. Martha, nervous, took out her phone and found the file. She handed it to Alexander. In the shaky, blurry video, Roger was walking in the garden with a cane, a nurse beside him. It was slow, difficult, but he was walking. The date in the corner of the screen 6 months ago. Alexander watched in silence. When it was over, he looked at his father, who was in his wheelchair by the window, being cared for by a nurse they had called in for the emergency. Roger looked back, and for the first time in a long time, his eyes were clearer, more present. Dad, Alexander said, approaching him, is it true? You could walk? Roger moved his head slowly. Yes. And you think that... Alexander couldn't finish the sentence. The old man took a deep breath, gathered his strength. She gave me feeling too much. I got weak. The voice was fragile, slurred, but it was his, and it was real. Alexander closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was pain there, pain and rage. Valerie, get out of my house. Alexander, please, now. Valerie realized she had lost. She stood up, still trying to maintain her composure, and left the room. But before she went up the stairs, she turned. You'll regret this. Your father always belittled you, always treated you like you were incompetent. Now that he finally... Depends on you. You choose to believe some random maid? Alexander didn't answer. He just pointed to the door. When Valerie was gone, Mr. Bernardes turned to Lucy. We'll need you to give a statement, and we're going to contact the health authorities. This is a case of possible elder abuse and improper administration of medication. I'll do it, Lucy said, even though she knew what it meant. Lost work days, interrogations, exposure. Alexander approached her. How much do you make here? Lucy told him the amount quietly. From now on it's double, and I'm paying for all your medical expenses and your mother's surgery. Lucy felt tears welling up. Sir, I didn't do this for money. I know, but I need to do what's right, and this is the least I can do. In the following days, the investigation moved forward. The State Medical Board summoned Dr. Salinas, who tried to defend himself by saying he was just following the family's instructions. But when confronted with the actual doses administered versus those prescribed, he couldn't explain the discrepancy. Valerie was notified to give a statement. She hired expensive lawyers and built a defense based on caregiver stress and misinterpretation of her intentions. But the evidence was overwhelming. The videos, the audio recordings, the vial, the testimonies of Lucy, Martha, and Julio. For Lucy, every step had a cost. She lost days at the courthouse, sitting on hard benches, waiting to be called. She spent what little money she had on bus fare. She saw her mother's surgery get postponed again, despite Alexander's promise, because bureaucracy takes time. But there were small victories too. Martha's son was hired by a local supermarket, thanks to a recommendation from Julio, who used his neighborhood connections. The parish offered to create a support group for families caring for the elderly, teaching them to identify signs of abuse. And Roger slowly began to come back. Not completely. The time in the chair, the excessive medication, it had all left its mark. But with physical therapy, with proper medical supervision, with Lucy by his side singing hymns as he tried to move his legs, he began to recover small things. Holding a cup, turning his head without getting dizzy, standing with support for a few seconds. One afternoon, as Lucy was helping him with his exercises, Roger held her hand and said, clearly, "Thank you." She smiled, squeezed back. "You're welcome, Mr. Roger. You saved me. We saved each other, Mr. Roger, because you didn't give up either." And it was true. Because if he had given up, if he had accepted the silent erasure, if he had stopped trying to move that finger on the armrest, Lucy might never have noticed. But he fought in the only way he could. And she fought too. Together, they had turned on a light in a place full of shadows. And even knowing that human justice is slow, imperfect, and full of flaws, there was comfort in knowing that the truth finally was being seen. A year later, the world wasn't perfect, but it looked more like something just. Mr. Roger was living in a spacious, simple apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Yonkers, far from the cold echo of Emerald Gardens. He still used a wheelchair, but now his hands could hold a cup without shaking so much, and with the help of a physical therapist, he could stand for a few minutes each day. In the corner of the living room, the old piano was open. Sometimes, with Lucy beside him, he would venture to play clumsy fragments of the old jazz standards that had once filled the big house with music. The consequences for the antagonists were clear, without gratuitous cruelty. Valerie faced charges for elder abuse and improper administration of medication. She didn't go to prison for years, but she received a probationary sentence, mandatory therapy, and a restraining order against Roger. She lost direct access to the family fortune, and her social image shattered. The friends who once flocked to her at charity events now looked away when they saw her on the street. She had to sell her imported car, her park, Avenue condo, her jewelry. And she learned the hard way that control built on lies always crumbles. Dr. Salinas was disciplined by the state medical board. His license was temporarily suspended, and he was required to work under supervision at a public geriatric hospital, where he saw up close the faces he had once only seen in reports. In the first few months he resisted, complaining about the workload and lack of resources. But over time, something in him began to change. He started listening to the elderly patients, asking how they felt, adjusting medications with care. He didn't become a saint, but he became a doctor again. Alexander, after much resistance, accepted his share of the blame. He realized he had outsourced his father's care, preferring to believe Valerie because it was easier, more convenient. With the help of Father Stephen, who became a sort of spiritual advisor to the family, he began a more honest relationship with Roger. He visited without photographers, without business interests, just as a son. And in the difficult conversations, full of uncomfortable silences, the two slowly reconnected. It was during one of these visits that Alexander proposed the idea for the foundation. "Dad," Lucy gave me an idea. "What if we created a project to train caregivers from low-income neighborhoods, teach them how to recognize signs of abuse, how to document everything, how to have a voice?" Roger, sitting in his chair by the window, looked at his son and smiled. good idea. And so the Hope and Dignity Foundation was born. It was small, headquartered in a room provided by the parish, but its purpose was clear: to train caregivers, provide them with tools, and teach them their rights. Lucy took on the role of coordinator, combining her humble experience with technical courses she could finally afford. She welcomed groups of women, almost all from the outer boroughs, almost all with stories similar to her own, and taught them what she had learned: to observe, to write things down, to not be afraid to speak up. At the first training session, she handed out blue-covered notebooks to everyone. "This notebook can save a life," she said. "Write down everything: times, symptoms, strange conversations. Because one day, these notes could be the difference between the truth and a lie." The women listened in silence, some with tears in their eyes, because they recognized in themselves the Lucy of a year ago, invisible, disbelieved, afraid. At home, Lucy's mother finally had her surgery. Alexander paid for everything: a private hospital, a renowned doctor, post-op physical therapy. When she was discharged, the old woman cried with gratitude. "God rewards those who do right, my child." "Sometimes it takes a while, Mum, but he does." Martha continued to work at Alexander's house, but now with recognized dignity. She received a raise, her benefits were formalized, and she saw her son get a permanent job at the supermarket. On Sundays, she would visit Lucy and Roger at the apartment, bringing containers of food that filled the once silent space with the smell of home cooking. Julio also became a regular visitor. He would bring his tools, fix leaky faucets, and change light bulbs. And in their late afternoon conversations, as they drank coffee on the balcony, he would talk about his granddaughter who had gone back to school, inspired by the example of courage she had seen in the adults around her. Roger's apartment was simple, but alive. It had plants on the windowsill, photographs on the walls, books stacked on the shelves. There was no luxury, but there was warmth. And on Saturday afternoons, when Lucy came to keep him company, he would always ask her to sit at the piano with him. "Play that song my wife used to like," he'd ask. Lucy, who had never really learned to play, would place her fingers on the keys and try. She'd hit the wrong notes, laughing. Roger would correct her patiently. And slowly, out of tune but sincere, the melody would emerge. One afternoon, as the sun set over the simple facades of the neighborhood, Lucy pushed Roger's wheelchair out to the balcony where jasmine grew in pots. The old man took a deep breath, looked at the people passing on the street, the kids playing ball at life happening. "I never thought I'd feel so free sitting down," he murmured. Lucy smiled, clutching the rosary she now always wore on her wrist. "Freedom isn't about where we are, Mr. Roger. It's about who we are." He looked at her, his eyes tired but grateful. "You taught me that." "We taught each other, Mr. Roger." And they sat there in silence, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, the distant honking of horns, the laughter of neighbors, a different kind of silence from the one in the mansion, a silence full of life. When the sun had set completely, Lucy helped Roger back inside. She prepared his evening tea, adjusted his pillows, and checked his medications, now in the correct doses, prescribed by a real doctor. Before leaving, as she always did, she took the blue notebook from her bag and wrote down the day's date, the small victories. Roger stood for 3 minutes, ate everything at lunch, played the piano. And on the last line, she added something new. It wasn't a routine note. It was a reflection, a testimony, to our prayer. God doesn't prevent the shadows, but he always gives light to those who dare to open the window. She closed the notebook, put it in her bag, and left. On the street, waiting for the bus, Lucy looked up at the dark, star-filled sky. She thought of the hospital years ago, of the old man who had died, of the weight she had carried. She thought of Roger, now safe, cared for, alive. She thought of the caregivers she was training, of the voices that were learning not to be silenced. And she felt for the first time, in a long time, that the old guilt had transformed into something else. Not pride, pride would be too much, but peace, the peace of someone who did what they could, with what they had, where they were. The bus arrived. Lucy got on, paid her fare, and sat by the window. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face, tired, older, but whole. And she smiled, because she had learned that justice doesn't arrive on a white horse with trumpets and applause. It comes slowly, in small steps, built by calloused hands that refuse to let go. It comes in the notes of a blue notebook, in the recordings of a cracked phone, in the courage of someone who decides that their voice, even if it trembles, will be heard, and that God always, always walks alongside those who choose the light.